2 gallons of gas, 3 gallons of gas, 5 gallons of gas. All right, if you haven't figured it out, this video is going to be all about the Nomad fuel tank. We're going to install it, we're going to look at it, we're going to measure it, we're going to ride around with it. Is it too much gas? Is it too ugly? So here are the 2 tanks. These are going to be the ones most everybody's going to switch to from the 2-gallon tanks. 2-gallon tanks will get you about 100 miles unless you're pushing hard, right? And then you might be down into the 60, 80 mile range. And then 3 gallons, really for almost anything you do, is enough fuel until you start doing some of the longer sections of the more lonely BDRs. And then you end up carrying some gas on your bike like I've been doing for a year. Obviously, any weight you're carrying back here really affects the handling of your bike. You really notice when you've got weight up there, where when you put it up where it's supposed to be in the tank, which sits over the motor, the weight of the gas gets split between the front and the back suspension. And another thing I think is interesting about the Nomad tank is the extra gas you carry out in the wings of this thing actually sits fairly low, right? If you compare how the IMS tank carries its weight, most of the weight in the Nomad tank sits low. So I'm hoping that it sits low on the bike, that you don't really notice it, right? That's the way the rally bikes do it. They usually have their gas slung way, way low on saddle tanks. And this is going to act sort of like a saddle tank. As far as how these 2 tanks compare, I can tell you that the stock tank with the shrouds weighs about 3.8 pounds. The IMS tank with the shrouds is about 5.8 pounds, a little less than 6 pounds. That's obviously with no gas in it. The Nomad tank weighs 6.8 pounds, so it is 1 pound heavier than the IMS tank for 2 gallons of gas gain. Now that obviously is weighed without the shrouds on it, because the Nomad tank, as you can see, doesn't actually have a place for shrouds to go. When you're comparing them just sitting there on their tops, the shape is pretty much the same, right? The IMS tank uses that kind of a well effect the same way the Nomad does. I think it's interesting. People worry about the gas shifting from the bottom of the wings up into the tank. And it is down there, don't get me wrong. But the IMS has the same setup, right? There's this deep groove, and then you get gas out in the wings. That gasoline still has to make it up over this groove. And in my experience, it always has. What happens is this bottom piece is so deep that anything that splashes in there pretty much doesn't splash back out. Nomad does exactly the same thing, but then they add these little winglets back here. So I'm assuming that the gas can flow in and kind of get redirected by this little thing here back into the holding area. The construction of these are both about the same. They're both rotomolded, although I got to tell you, the IMS tank with its little metal ring to hold the screws in, and the Nomad tank has the same thing, but these are molded in. You can actually feel the back sides. They're molded into the plastic piece. But the IMS tank, manufacturing-wise, looks-wise, just looks better made. I'm not saying it is, I'm just saying it kind of looks it, right? Like the finish is better with this rough finish, where the Nomad tank has all these edges here, and you know that they came in with a grinder or something, and they cleaned up the edges on the tank. Now, On the outside, it looks okay. It is what it is. But just manufacturing wise, if you were to stare at both these tanks, the IMS just looks slightly better built. I know nothing about building things out of plastic, so you're just gonna have to go with my overall general observations. Nomad tank gets its extra 2 gallons in the two obvious places. Number one are how wide these wings are, right? The IMS tank only comes out to about here, where the Nomad tank comes out more, and of course it drops down. My understanding is that these wings will hold about 1 gallon at the bottom below the level where it splashes up. The other place that makes up for it is if you measure from where the fuel pump sits to the top of the neck, the Nomad comes out to 13 inches deep, where the IMS tank comes out to 12, so it sits a little taller. Another difference between the two is that the IMS tank uses the stock shrouds to cover it, where the Nomad tank does not. The stock shrouds won't fit, and it also comes with a radiator guard slash brace that fits over your radiator. It hangs onto the frame in the middle, and the outside pushes out against the Nomad tank and connects here and here, kind of locking it onto the bike. And also keep in mind that when your bike tips over, right, it's going to land on the tank and it's going to try to shove the tank over. So if it did that hard enough, it would break your tank, and it would probably bend your radiators as well. So by adding these shrouds in there and using this as kind of a brace, it reinforces everything, which in my mind sounds pretty cool. It sounds like your tank is going to turn into a big giant bumper a la KTM 790R, and perhaps save your radiator from some damage. So there's a comparison of what they look like off the bike. Obviously everybody wants to know, what do they look like on the bike? So what we're going to do next is we're going to switch the fuel pump from the IMS tank, put it into the Nomad tank, and put it on the bike. All right, enough talking. Let's get this installed quick. Hopefully it won't take too long, and we'll see what she looks like on the bike. If you're switching from an IMS tank to the Nomad tank, know that you're going to need the original stock O-rings. The IMS tank's O-rings are not the same size. So it comes with this O-ring on the edge, and that seals on this inner lip. And then it has this dust seal, or what they're calling a dust seal, which you got to line up all your little tabs here. You have to cut this little part here off. There's no dent in the tank to accommodate that. So that gets cut off. But again, you have to go back to your original O-rings. Understand that this O-ring on this tank doesn't actually seal anything. Right, this is the IMS one, it won't even fit. The actual sealing action happens in here. Okay, so we cut that off. Now, if you're coming from the stock tank to this, then don't worry about anything that I just said. So this dust seal is kind of finicky. Get these little tabs to sit down in their little grooves again. And they will stay, but you got to ask them nicely. There we go. Now to get this O-ring to go in easy, I'm gonna smear it with just a dab of grease. All right, everything's nice and lined up, looking pretty. And then now I can feel the O-ring kind of resist. Oh, and there it goes. Oh, and it wants to pop back off. It goes on like so. And then remember how I laid these out so that I wouldn't screw them up? So the compression washer goes on the outside, goes on the top. So I just want to make sure everybody can see that. It's the sleeve, compression washer, right, and a regular washer. And they go on in that order. And then the sleeve sits down far enough that it grabs the rim and the piece of plastic. There we go, just tight enough to keep everything in. Now, this piece normally goes right here. And the only thing you end up using this for anymore, I do, is to hold the electrical connector. I'm sorry, this side. It holds the electrical connector wire in place. I think I'm going to leave this out. The one thing that's the hardest about taking the tank on and off is getting that electrical connector unclipped. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that off on my installation. Y'all do you. I do what I want. And then we'll get all these put on, and then as usual we'll do it in a star pattern, and we'll go on to the next thing. Everything's lined up. We've got the outlet facing the front. If this was to go on, it would go right here. We did the star pattern. We've got the notch and the little circle are all lined up. These holes are kind of offset, so you can't really put it on any way but the way it is. And then again, remember, it's that O-ring I showed you that actually does the sealing, not this dust seal on the bottom. That's the difference between the IMS tank and the Nomad tank, or a difference. Next, we're gonna pull our radiator guards off. This side, you're gonna have to actually take the horn off in order to get the radiator guard off, but that just gives you a good chance to check your horn bracket to make sure it's not broken. Yep, looks like I'm not going to lose my horn anytime soon. All right, it says to put the left side radiator guard on, and this bolt is going to hold the horn, which means I have to pull this bracket apart for the horn, right? So take this out, put that on. There we go. Oh, look at that. So that goes in there, and then that little tab goes up in here. All right? Next we're going to put this bracket on, well, I'm sorry. Next we're going to fish this bent hose clamp on, and it's going to hold this bracket in place right there. This should go right here, but you got to fish it, oh there we go, around the cable. Let's get a turn or two on it. You try it from the other side maybe. There we go. So you get 1 or 2 turns on it so it doesn't take off on you, and then keep working this around to the front. To get it in place. Now I still don't, everything's loose, right? This is loose, that's loose, the top one's loose, but it looks about like it is where it needs to be. Just be careful your clutch cable comes down through the middle of all this mess. You might have to clip the clips off and move it around on the inside of the radiator in order to get this to work right. But there we go. So this side's on, and now you can start to see that when the tank takes a hit, it goes right into the frame there. There you go. Remember those braces that go towards the back. Install this bottom one down here. Okay, so I'm going to tighten up these outside ones. I'm going to leave the bottom ones loose until I get the tank on. I think these might be kind of hard to get to with the tank on, but the lower ones should be pretty easy peasy. There we go. Radiator's in, guards are there. All right, let's drop the tank on. I'm going to leave this loose just so I can wiggle things around. Oh. Huh. Oh my. Now here's the part I am most worried about. Oh, actually that's not bad. All right. How to get this hose back on and the electrical connector. There's not much room to be down there to begin with. Make sure it clicks. Just same thing with the hose, it's got to go all the way on. Oh, there we go. So that little green thing won't go on unless you're all the way on. And then this is your final check. When you snap this back up on, it's the right size. If you're not locked in, this won't fit. Okay, all right, we're hooked up. Now let's see if we can get this the rest of the way on. Now these up here have to line up. All right, there's one. Don't forget, we still got to tighten all these guys here up. All right, so the last part of the installation is just screwing the back part of the tank down with these little brackets right here that go into the stock spots. I gotta say I like this setup a lot better than the IMS setup, where on this side it's just a bumper and on the far side it's an L bracket, and I've had 2 of those L brackets break, so I like the Nomad setup much better. Do the bracket on the other side, and then the last thing we have to do is put the seat on, and then we'll be ready to go. Here's kind of the first look at it. It definitely droops low, doesn't it? Add the finishing touches. What do you think?